both voluntary and involuntary, of knowledge and of ignorance, to use the words of one of our common prayers. Why? Because our goal is to become more and more like the God-man, Jesus Christ. And the evils of this world sometimes get in the way of that goal, even if we have no intention at all of letting them do so. It doesn't matter who's complaining. What matters is our communion with God. And that can be ruptured or impaired even when we do not mean for it to be. The Orthodox Christian faith is not about trial and punishment, condemnation and blame, but rather about union with God. A union without fusion, in which God and man become intimately together and yet remain distinct. And that brings us to what is perhaps the most characteristic difference between Orthodoxy and Roman Catholicism, and again with Western Christian theology in general. What does it mean for us to be saved? What is our goal as human beings? For the Orthodox, life is about participation in the actual divine life of God himself, about becoming by grace what Jesus Christ is by nature. And for us, grace is nothing less than the actual presence of God himself. Grace is God. The Christian life is therefore about this participation, about communion, about union. Forgiveness of sins, critical as that is really just the beginning. One, of course, needs to be on good terms with someone before there can be intimacy. But being on good terms is not itself the intimacy. Our goal is the intimacy. Forgiveness is just a return so that the intimacy can begin, can resume, or can be deepened. While there are numerous more differences we could discuss between Orthodoxy and the Roman Catholic Church, many of which apply to Western Christianity in general, let us move on to consider some differences which are particular to Orthodoxy compared with Protestantism. But before we get into the particulars, I did want to say something here as a historical note. It is true that in many ways the churches of the Protestant Reformation continue to define themselves by how they are not like Rome, even if only implicitly. Yet because of Orthodoxy's historical positioning, that is, because Orthodoxy's actual communal origins are found with the preaching of the apostles. If I discuss Orthodox doctrine and church life here in terms of contrasts with Roman Catholics and Protestants, it is not for the same reason that Protestants compare themselves with Rome. That is, we are not a protest or a reform movement seeking to change or improve upon the communities of our origins. From our point of view, we didn't break away from the Roman Catholic Church. It broke away from us. So my purpose in using the comparison and contrast method is simply because it is likely that most of us here in the West have a great deal more familiarity with Protestantism and Roman Catholicism than we do with Orthodoxy. So Western Christianity, even if one is not a believer, is probably our common starting point in considering Christianity. That said, probably what is most immediately striking about Orthodoxy in comparison with most of Protestantism in our time, and of course I am generalizing here, is that Orthodoxy has a distinctly historical sense of itself. By way of example, the administrative portion of Orthodoxy to which I belong is the Church of Antioch, founded in roughly the year 40. That's right, 40, by the apostles Peter and Paul. My bishop can literally trace the line of his succession of ordination over almost 2,000 years back to those two apostles. Because of this historical sensibility, those who encounter Orthodox worship often come away with a sense of timelessness, of having stepped out of the modern world and into a sacred place where the music, philosophies, and trends of popular culture are essentially irrelevant. Orthodox worship and doctrine never need to be updated because they never become outdated. They have not been tied to the spirit of any age, but are rather concerned with what is ageless, what is beyond the ever-shifting winds of popular Thus, while Protestantism tends to approach Christian life in terms of what seems right to the individual believer here and now, Orthodoxy is characterized by a strongly historical approach to Christian experience and faith. We are acutely aware that we are only the latest generation in a faith that has lasted for 2,000 years. And we are constantly returning to the profound insights of the great Orthodox Christians of centuries past. For us, whatever is the latest thing in theology is not very interesting. Indeed, what is new and innovative for us is subject to suspicion as being the invention of fallible human opinion, and not the unchanging faith given to the apostles. So while, of course, each time and place requires new vocabulary and new modes of expression, the fundamental message that is being communicated is always the same. We do not develop our doctrine, only our manner of expressing it. And if we are strongly conscious of what has come before us and our responsibility to it, then we are also very much conscious of our whole ecclesial community. For most Protestants, the central question is how the individual relates directly to God. Well, this question is, of course, critical to Orthodox Christians. For us, the answer to it can never be taken in isolation from the church as a community. If most Protestant Christians see their local church as a place for teaching and fellowship with other believers that nevertheless is not actually critical to salvation, Orthodox Christians see their local church as at the heart of what it means to be a Christian. There is a common saying among the Orthodox: we are saved together, but damned alone. Damnation is an individualized experience, while salvation is always in and through the church. It is personal, but not private. And this sense of the central role of the community in salvation is not out of any collectivist ideology, in which group identity supersedes individual identity, but it rather flows from the revelation of who God himself is: Father, Son, and Holy Spirit. God, while being one, has revealed himself as three. The Trinity is himself a communion of love, a community of three persons. It is in this central doctrinal affirmation that the truth of the church's community is revealed, because the church is nothing less than the communion of the Holy Trinity being extended into mankind. The bonds of Christian love extend not just within the congregation in one's local church community, but also throughout all the communities cared for by one's bishop, and through him to those of other Orthodox bishops and their communities. And these bonds extend not only through geographic space, but also through time, and through what we might think of as the spiritual space that connects Christians alive on earth with those who are even more alive in heaven. Thus, with this highly ecclesiological consciousness for Christian life, that is, with a sense that there is no Christianity without the church, it only makes sense that we should regard the history of the church as worthy knowledge, not just for professional students of theology, but as normal for every Christian. Protestantism's individualism is also very much in play in its approach to authority. Perhaps the greatest of the watchwords of the Protestant Reformation is sola scriptura, the Bible alone, in which only the Bible, as interpreted by the individual believer, is held to be authoritative for Christian life. Orthodoxy, by contrast, has the ecclesial memory of having existed before the Bible was written, collected, and canonized. And so our sense of authority, of course, includes the Bible, but it is only one facet, though a very prominent facet, of a more sparkling gem. For us, interpreting the Scriptures and all other questions of authority come back to the communion of the church and its coherence between all Orthodox Christians, past and present. If the genius of Roman Catholicism is hierarchy and structure, and I use the word genius here in its literary sense, that is the special spirit of a movement or philosophy, And if individualism is the genius of the Protestant Reformation, then Orthodoxy's particular genius is the sense of man's communion. And that communion is primarily, of course, with God, but also, as we have seen, with one's fellow believers. But it is also with the whole of the created order. For Orthodox Christians, spiritual life is profoundly physical. Because man is a union of both soul and body, the practice of orthodoxy therefore appeals to and involves the whole man. It is not just his mind and his emotions to which this faith connects, but it is also all the senses. Ours is very much a bodily faith, whether it is the prostrations of the penitent during Great Lent, the sound of the otherworldly chanting of our church musicians, the smell of incense used in almost every worship service, the fasting from animal products we undertake for nearly half the days of the year, or the touch and the taste of the holy mysteries. The physicality of spiritual life is particularly expressed through the practice of asceticism